Are you ready to grow profit with less stress, more clarity, and a strategy that actually sticks? That's why I created the 7 Steps to Profit, a practical business framework that helps leadership teams align their strategy, culture, people, customer, and execution so the profit naturally follows. For over 30 years, I've worked with leaders across every industry, and the one truth that always holds: when the different parts of your business are aligned, everything gets easier. So if you're tired of firefighting, tired of silos, it's time to transform how your business works. Our work is also supported by our own organization health assessment to give you clarity on what you need to focus on. Give us a call today for a no-strings discovery call. In the meantime, visit 7stepstoprofit.com. That's the number 7. Hello there, and welcome back to Boardroom Insights with Alan O'Neill. For the next while, I'm going to be talking to a great friend from Michigan, USA, called Ralph Ward. Ralph is the editor of the Boardroom Insider. He's also the author of Hacking the Boardroom, his new book, one of 6, I think. Ralph, is that correct?
7.
One of 7. Wow, okay. But Ralph is a specialist and an expert in structure, roles of board members, and the best way to get great governance through a board. So for the next while, we're going to have a good chat about what makes a great board, what to watch out for, when to introduce non-exec directors, and also for family companies, just a little watch out as well along the way. So let's go then, Ralph. First of all, tell us a bit about you. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I've been working on board and governance issues primarily in the U.S., but internationally for 35 years now, which is a scary number to count. Keep trying to retire, and I keep not quite getting away from it because it's fascinating. I've been editor of the Corporate Board magazine here in the States since 1990. Around the millennium, I launched my own newsletter, Boardroom Insider, to take a little bit of a different look at boards. It sort of fits well with what I do in the Corporate Board magazine. That's sort of the 10,000 meter look at the great issues of governance. Boardroom Insider is the stuff I'm more interested in, the nuts and bolts of boardsmanship, how people work together, and accumulated quite a bit of information on that over the years. I just published my 7th book, Hacking the Boardroom, as you mentioned, and I do quite a bit of speaking in the U.S. and overseas. As I said, I have a bit of a different approach and interest in the topic. I like what happens when you get a group of people with conflicting agendas who really don't know each other that well together every few months to look at some very important, sometimes life and death issues for a
Indeed.
company or any organization, and trying to work that out, trying to inform themselves, trying to do a decent job of it when everything is stacked against them doing a good job. It isn't fit for purpose. The boardroom model isn't, but it's the model we've got. And trying to sweep together all of the things people can do to make this more effective. We're not going to overhaul the board of directors model. It's universal, worldwide. But that's why I call them hacks, little tips and tools, things you can do. Comes from the data processing industry. You're not going to completely reboot your platform, but you can do a few little things and they add up to making things work better.
Why don't we start at a very basic level and just answer the simple, obvious question, I guess, with tongue in cheek. What is the purpose of a board? I mean, every organization has its management team, and the board is sometimes different. So what do you see as the key role of a board?
A board is sort of a psychological concept of the ego or the overego, I guess, something like that, that is in the background, monitoring what's happening here and correcting and trying to give guidance and overall thought to what's happening. It's a difficult position. No one likes to have their conscience knocking on their door. No one likes it when you're trying to do day-to-day work and there's some voice in the background saying, well, this isn't effective, or well, this isn't really the proper way of handling things. But that's the role that we've given the board. And again, it's incredibly bad way of doing it, but it's the way we have for it
Right.
here.
And
Think about on the boards you're involved with, how much information do you get before a board meeting and have to absorb, sometimes even just a couple of days before the board meeting?
yeah,
A
yeah.
huge file online, the traditional fat paper board book, things like that. How do you absorb all of that? You
Well, I
don't.
guess, yeah, and no, you don't. And I suppose it comes down to the point then, what's the level of detail? Because I mean, isn't the board all about oversight and governance rather than making executive decisions about direction? I mean, just clarify. I mean, to clarify, I know there's different levels of involvement. How would you differentiate the level of intensity and involvement in, for example, in the running of the business, if any?
Ideally, there should be a very limited amount because the board
Right.
members, at least the independent directors, don't know that much. That's one of the little secrets no one wants to admit. If you are an independent director, you are a business leader in your own, what I call day job life. You're putting a huge amount of mind share and thought into running a business, operating a business, being a chief executive. Now you have to pull away for a few minutes every few months to focus on this entirely different entity that you have a very limited amount of information on. And you're expected to come in and second guess the day-to-day managers who are like you are with your business. They live, eat, and
Yeah.
breathe this. And you have to come in and tell them, well, you could do this better. Let's look at this. Let's look over this information. Very difficult. One of the first things I recommend is to take a good look at the information the board gets. It usually is swept together management reports, data, spreadsheets, memos, things like that from people who are day to day in the business. They're going to be shorthanding the information. They're going to be giving you stream of consciousness information on
Yeah.
what they're doing constantly. And you're coming in from the outside trying to catch up on this. It's
Really good. It's a really good point. And I suppose as time goes on, if a director is with an organization for over time, the knowledge will accumulate over time. But certainly in the first 6 to 12 months, it can be difficult. But given that the level of detail that they can possibly know and absorb in those few pages before the board meeting, it goes back again to the point about what is the level of detail that a board should be expected to know, therefore. How much, I know it's how long is a piece of string, Ralph, but how much should they be expected to know?
um, obviously the basics, operating margins and measures and revenue formulas and things like that. Um, Certainly the numbers are involved there. But again, you get into the problem is something that looks ominous in a spreadsheet or in
Mm,
a operating ratio hidden on page 37 of enclosure F or something like that.
hmm.
That's why I'm very big on using online tools, board portals, and especially exciting is AI tools for
Hmm.
dealing with this. There are a lot of dangers involved in that, but if I can use AI to look at dozens of pages of information and say, go into this, find me the high points, find dangers and things that are awry that I might be missing, and give me a quick summary on it,
Mm.
you become a lot more effective. And then you can always have that as a caveat to go back and look at the full amount of information. As I
Yeah.
said, it's a coming thing. It's obvious. Directors have to do this going forward, but they'll have to sort through the dangers involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you're going to go that direction with AI because it's an obvious solution in that situation to identify using a chat GPT type of AI to identify highlights and lowlights in advance. I totally get that. But doesn't it also feed into to what extent board members, at least non-executive board members, should be involved in formulation of strategy, vision, and culture? Or should they just be the custodians of that? What's your experience, Ralph?
My experience is that the board and top management, chief executive, work on the strategic plan together. This is the one of the benefits of being on a board of directors is objectivity and coming from the
Mm,
outside. And we always see this because the outsider can bring fresh eyes and thoughts to something that people who are in it on a day-to-day basis are going to miss or overlook. There'll be the trees hidden in the forest. But there's always the problem of the outsider coming in with something that's obvious or doesn't work, but they think that it will work. And that's why I really like looking at the skills, putting together a good skills matrix for the board, because the independent directors, even if they don't know your particular company as an outside board member, these are very savvy, accomplished people. They know where things are hidden. They know what gets overlooked from their own business and the times, frankly, that they've gotten burned in the past. They know what to ask and they know what to look at here.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It
So,
becomes a difficult balance here because then they have to empower management to make that strategy work and then
right.
put together the measures they need to know on how well it's working.
So selection, therefore, of when a company is inviting in outside directors, non-exec directors, the selection that they use, that they embrace, is critically important. That the mix, doing a skills matrix, you just suggested that, and that they should have a skills matrix rather than just bringing, well, my great friend is a director over in three other companies.
I know a guy who knows a
I know a
guy.
guy.
He'd be good
I
on
know
the
a guy
board.
exactly. So you would be a strong advocate of ensuring the right fit in the first place.
I would. And
Mm.
again, there's some caveats on that because one trend I see in the governance advising industry, the academic, the thought leadership, is bringing in directors with specific skill areas. We need someone with strong technical background. We need someone who knows AI here. We saw
Mm.
certainly over the last few years on diversity and ESG. We need someone with strong risk management, and everyone would have their own portfolio. And that's good, but then you get into the problem of if you're an expert with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. How
Yes.
do you deal with that? So, what I encourage people is not to try to come up with specific skill areas for each member of the board, but to look at what they know overall. Yes, they have run a P&L level business at the top level, but they also helped us put in a new tech initiative at the company here. They have dealt with succession issues. They have dealt with
Right.
a turnaround crisis on their board. I would like someone on my board who has helped a company through hard times rather than someone who has experience with all clear sailing and sunny skies. They've
Mm.
learned a few things. They've learned how to deal with adversity, and also they've learned the early warning signs when something's going to go wrong.
Right. And linked to that, then, so skill mix and experience mix is a really important consideration rather than just getting the guy who knows a guy who knows a guy. But what about the other consideration around diversity? And I mean, let's talk gender, which is a one glaring us in the face. What's your experience, Ralph, in how's that trend, that really important trend of getting gender balance mix right?
Boards I have encountered are still doing a mixed job of it here. They are aware of this now. If you dig out annual reports from 20 or 30 years ago, look at the group photos of the board. It was perfectly acceptable and what everyone thought was the norm to have a
Yeah.
group of 12 old white guys named George gathered around a table. No one gave it a second thought. If you
Yeah.
do that today, it screams out at everyone. This
Yes.
is not a diverse group. So you simply can't get away with it at that level. And that sort of ties into board recruitment, but boards are still doing it a little bit off. They're using more of the recruiters and recruiting firms they work with for top talent now on board searches, which is a good thing, and I think
Indeed.
it's positive. Um, Not as much as possibly they should do, and they're coming in with unrealistic expectations. I talk quite a bit with top recruiters who do board searches, and they say they have boards coming and telling them, we need a minority woman who is a leader of a major tech company to come into our board. And they have to give a reality check to the board. Okay, you've got about 0.1% of the talent that's out there, and she's already massively booked up. So that isn't
Sure,
going to happen.
sure, sure.
How do you
I mean,
deal with that? You start looking below the CEO level here.
mm,
CFOs, COOs, divisional presidents. And when you start looking below that level, lo and behold, you're getting more women, you're getting more diversity.
yeah,
So
yeah.
they're having to lower their sights, but actually that improves the quality of what they're getting.
It's an interesting one. And I know everybody intellectually will say that, look, it should be about skills and experience first before gender. And I totally get that. But I know there's one client of mine and they really struggled with this, that it was an all male board and they knew that they needed to have female representation, but they struggled. They really struggled. And that's unfortunate. But, as maybe generations change, hopefully, I think the important thing is to be mindful and to always have this as a priority. But of course, it has to be skills first rather than just gender first. Don't you agree?
I agree here. But then you get into what skills? What are you really looking at? And that's why the skills matrix we mentioned a few minutes ago is
Yeah,
actually useful. I encourage you not using a single skills matrix. Put together two. This is a skills matrix of what we got, who's on the board, who knows what is their knowledge, experience, and
yeah,
background. Here's number two skills matrix. This would be our ideal blue sky matrix for our company, our strategy, where we're going, and what the markets are.
yeah,
Then look at
yeah,
the two of them and say, how well do they match? If you have a severe mismatch between the two, you're going to have to start prodding what you've got into what you want a little bit more.
yeah.
And that makes board refreshment more important.
Right.
Long board tenures, I am not a fan of that.
No, I
You
think they
need
become
more
part of the furniture. They,
turnover. Yeah.
yeah,
Look at the tenure of chief executives at companies and the trend line on that over the last decade or 2 decades. It's steadily become shorter and shorter how many years you have a chief executive.
yeah.
Why should your board be any different from that?
Indeed. Well, in my country, in Ireland, Ralph, the leaders of semi-state organizations, I just discovered this recently. I hope I don't give an incorrect statement here, but certainly it has come on my radar that they have a 7-year term. That when a
Hmm.
CEO becomes a CEO, he or she must leave after 7 years for that very point that you just alluded to. I mean, 7 years feels long to me for an external non-exec director to be on board. But staying with the point of gender, it's very interesting. I was working with a client, and this client is a retailer where their customer base is 90% female decision makers. Okay?
Hmm.
Now think about that. And on the board was completely populated with males, right? And it was just all wrong. And when the mix, I suspect that when the skills matrix was developed, it was developed for all the, I guess, technical skills like finance and marketing and blah, blah, blah. But had they considered a skill mix that also included customer buying cycles and customer psychology, they might have widened it out a little bit further. And that would have given a weighting under having a woman on the board. So I think your point about skills matrix, it's not just straightforward. You've got to think broader about that, I suspect.
And that's why what you do is so valuable,
Hmm.
because it's very possible until you came in and pointed this out to them, it was hidden in plain sight. They never thought,
Yes,
oh, that's
I hadn't
right.
thought
We're
of
all a
that.
bunch of guys here and we're selling to an overwhelmingly female market.
Yeah.
And there probably will be discomfort and some, well,
Yeah.
we know what's going on here. But you've
Yeah.
planted a seed with them, and eventually they're going to realize, yeah,
Yeah.
we need to
We're
have
missing it.
that diversity here at the top to deal with the diversity of our product. So
Sure.
bravo to you. You gave them
Yeah.
exactly what they needed.
So, Ralph, the role of CEO and chairman, because that's an important one. And what do you see as best practice around ensuring that dynamic is right between chairman and CEO?
Well, here in the States, we have an oddly
You
pretty
do.
much a standard at the top. Fortune 1000 level is a combined
I
CEO
know,
chair.
still
And
there.
that's one of the weird things we do. We still measure things in feet and inches. I won't even get into our presidential politics, but we do goofy things in the US. But that is fading. 20
Yes.
years ago, it was almost universal to have combined roles at a
Mm,
large established company. Now it's down to maybe 60, 50%, and that is slowly declining
right.
because it's accepted that that doesn't work now. And we're also seeing the rise of the lead independent director in those cases where you still have a combined role. A strong person who is on the board, leads the independents, often will run the board meetings themselves. So that it is an artifact, but it is an artifact that's slowly going extinct. And I think it's a mindset thing because a couple of decades ago, if you had become the chief executive of a large corporation and you did not end up also being the chair, it was an anomaly. Well, what's wrong with this guy? Why isn't he the chair anymore? And
Mm,
I'm not seeing it that much. Part of that might be the growth of fast growing tech companies here, which started out with the usual tech model of a split division. Now, some of the big tech bros that are trillionaires, they want to have that. They want to have shareholding options that give them more power here, but it's a generational mindset that the rising level of younger growth companies, they don't see that as a necessity.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's a positive thing.
Well, over here in Europe, I mean, there's a swing towards splitting the role. In fact, it's shunned. It's scorned on if the CEO is also the chairman. I'm curious because many of our listeners are in the Middle East, Ralph, and I know you and I both have worked in the Middle East. What's your experience in the Middle East of that very same point? Are CEOs and chairmen tend the same person?
There you start getting into all sorts of very specific country and even family based issues here. It's very much an apples and oranges comparison in some ways. If you have a state ministry, if you have a family involved in something, then often the two roles will be combined. And also in India, where you have the promoters with strong powers in it here. I hesitate to compare the two because they're such different situations. But
Hmm.
again, I believe as major Middle Eastern countries are growing beyond their local regions, as they go outside, they're going to start seeing that their governance is being looked at more closely. And I expect they're going to start splitting the roles more religiously.
Are you seeing in the Middle East that a growth in the notion of a non-exec director being invited onto boards? Because I know I'm traveling there over and back 18 years now, and I know for a long, long time the idea of non-exec directors wasn't that prevalent. But I'm seeing in my experience more of it. What's your experience? Because you'd be more connected with that.
I am seeing that as well. Part of it is with the huge growth of business people, consultants, expatriates from the UK, from Europe, from the United States, and places like Dubai and Saudi. You have all of this talent coming in from outside the local family pools, and there's more of a realization, we want to grow, we want our company to go places, we've got all this talent just down the block that they may be from outside the country, but we can benefit from them in our
Right.
boardroom. So yes, I think that's why, because the rule applies in Dubai here. How many people who live in Dubai currently are natives of the Emirates? Not that many anymore.
Wow.
They're
Yeah.
all
I mean,
coming, all of us people who keep going there. And eventually the idea is, we got this talent living here.
yeah.
They've got good ideas. Maybe we need them on the board.
I think that number is 80% expat, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, in round
where are you going
numbers
to go?
here, the population of UAE is 10 million and there are 2 million locals in round numbers.
Exactly.
So you're right. I mean, it's an obvious one that they would draw in that experience from outside. But just,
Mhm.
I was curious to know your experience. Um, I'm thinking too about the legal implications, and it might be different in your part of the world to my part of the world. What are the implications? Because I know in my country there have been quite a number of stories and um, incidences where things went wrong and boards were asleep at the wheel and missed
Oh, yeah.
certain things. And the implications for non-exec directors is now being much more under the microscope. And so therefore, non-exec directors are not just readily taking on board appointments just because they got a phone call, because there's a whole risk attached to it now. What are you seeing in that regard?
The idea that leaders are hesitant to take on board roles because of the liability issues, I'm not that sold on that. In my first book, I quoted a good article from Forbes magazine saying that the liability dangers of serving on an outside board have gotten so high that good people aren't willing to do it anymore. And then I spring the surprise, well, that's from an article in 1968 in Forbes magazine. So, yeah, the idea that everyone's gotten scared to be on boards is sort of an evergreen, and I'm not really seeing it, but I am seeing, excuse me, more careful vetting and observation on what you're getting into and serving on a board. People are doing that, and that's good from companies like yours and the others that frankly help business leaders looking at a board opportunity to look into the background of this company. Who are these people? Who am I going to be gathered around the board table with? What could spring up going down the road? They're more willing to look nowadays
Yeah.
at what they're getting into here. And it can be a real issue here. Here in the States, we love to sue each other, and we're very happy to do that. And directors are aware of that. That's why directors and officers liability insurance has become an absolute must for almost all organizations, even nonprofits nowadays. You
Right.
you need that assurance in the background here because you're going to get sued, and more likely you're just going to get investigated to death, and it gets a very expensive process. Most director liability, a very small amount of it consists of a board member actually having to pay out of pocket legal damages or regulatory fines and things like that. The real expense comes from the investigation and all of the lawyers and all of the litigation and having to give testimony. It's hugely expensive, the process
Mm.
is. And most of these are settled without directors having direct liability, but they still have a lot of out-of-pocket costs and hassle involved. So that's with it. One thing I wanted to jump in, and it's a little bit of a backup here, but a lot of people don't really look at the homely realities of serving on a board of directors. Joining it, as I said, you may look into this. Is there a danger? But you're still chuffed about it. Oh, I've been asked to join the board of
Mm.
directors. How much time are you going to have to put into this? How
Right.
much mind share and effort are you going to have to put into it? And most directors don't give that a lot of thought. If they do, they tend to be very optimistic on it. When it pops up, when something goes awry, and there's an investigation or a scandal, or the company is in trouble and needs a turnaround, the clock is going to be reset. You're going to have to put
Mm.
a lot of time into that. People tend not to be aware of that. And the board itself, how it functions and how it works is a problem here. Look at the boards you have been involved with at the corporate level, the agendas. Uh, Board agendas tend to be an artifact from hundreds of years ago here, the way it's structured, the way
Mm.
everything happens with parliamentary procedure. It tends to tie up a lot of time, and it tends to make directors get frustrated with the process.
Mm.
People typically who are on boards do not walk away from the board meeting thinking, boy, that was a great board meeting. I had a lovely time.
Mm.
But you also don't want them walking away thinking, that was several hours of my life I'm never going to get back. That was frustrating. That was badly led, badly organized. I really didn't enjoy that because the work quality will suffer from that. How can you streamline your agenda to do more in less time? How can you handle board presentations, death by
Yeah.
PowerPoint that you suffer in the boardroom to make it more practical? These are
Yeah.
the realities that I have found board members complain about. They don't like it. It makes the quality of governance worse, but no one ever tends to do anything about it. They just accept it as a reality of life, that this is going to be a massive time suck that I'm not going to enjoy. It's like going to the dentist. I'm not looking forward to it, but I've got to do it
Sure.
periodically.
Sure.
It
Sure.
does not have to be that way, is the problem.
So, what's the alternative then? What do you recommend to clear out all that dross and weight of time and so on? What's your alternative proposal?
Starting out with the corporate company secretary, whoever is putting together the board information, giving good feedback from the board and the chief executive and the board chair. How can we do this with less? How can we use technology to make it easier to do? How can we have the board book, but make better use of things like dashboard reports for top
Yeah.
indicators? How can we use technology for it here? Most boards aren't. As I said here, if you boil down information to a few bullet points and some red, yellow, green light indicators for the top things we as the board have
Mm.
indicated matter, how can we do that to do a better job, but then use technology to click on one tab and find out in depth if something is a red light? Well, why is it? What does that mean? Then I have to do a deeper
Okay.
dive. Most of the time I don't.
Okay.
How,
Okay.
how can we have shorter board meetings and get more done in the same time? How do we integrate committee work at the board level, which you have seen has become where most of the heavy lifting and board work happens nowadays, at audit committee, at remuneration. They
Yeah.
do most of the work and it comes back to the full board, but it's still shorthanded. It's still handled somewhat ad hoc at the board level. I encourage them to look first at their committee structures, how they
Right.
work, their agendas, because that's going to determine how the rest of the board work does. But
Mm.
it's still not really looked into that way
Yeah.
to make it more effective. That's what I've done with my new book here.
Right.
Hacks, little ideas, saving
Super.
5 minutes here, doing a quicker job there, adding them all together, and you come away from the board meeting not saying, I loved it. That was wonderful. But you do come away saying, that was time well spent. I made a difference, and
Mm.
they used my time well. They
Mm.
respected what I had to do.
And what do you think separates a great non-exec director from one who, well, let's say to the extreme, a poor one? What's the range?
Commitment and accessibility. Have you been in a board meeting when they were still using board information packs, written paper ones? Have you been in one where a director sat down at the board table and tore open the meeting packet envelope for the very first
There
time
and
in the
then.
board
Mm.
meeting? You have seen that. That is not a good director. Everyone else knows it's not a good director, but it can still happen.
Mm.
On the other hand, have you been in board meetings when they've had a paper pack and it looked like it was beaten up, it was dog-eared, had coffee stains on it, had paper sticky notes tucked into it? That advertises a good director. They put in their homework. They gave the amount of time. Um, how much time typically goes into the board meeting itself versus board meeting prep for a good director? If you're a good director, there's a lot more time going in than just sitting around the table. The
Right.
ratio is very different here. And that's one thing I encourage in board evaluation. Board evaluation is a powerful tool, still not being used well. It
Indeed.
tends to
Yeah.
be sort of we're doing a good job here. We need to do a better job there. We avoid looking at
That's interesting.
individual players, and also we don't look outside of the boardroom. Evaluation doesn't look into material, time usage, the preparation of what we get. It's still more of a let's look around the table as a beauty show thing.
So are you saying that then in the same way that an organization internally in their operations, they might do an annual review for each individual's performance, are you suggesting that that should happen at the board level by the chairman also? that
By the chairman also.
he or she should appraise their colleagues annually.
Their colleagues, the colleagues, each other. One other thing I would add to board review, appraisals, evaluation, how you phrase it, is some 360-degree,
Right.
because who is going to know how well the audit committee is doing its job better than the chief financial officer or the head
Yeah.
of audit? No man is a hero to his valet. No director is a hero to the staff that have to supply them information and explain them to them.
Mm.
Who other than, say, the audit committee or the head of HR for remuneration is going to know this group doesn't know what they're doing?
Yeah.
I have to explain this to them and they still don't get it. You want that insight. It's a very
It's interesting.
difficult feedback, but these are going to be the people who know how well the board is doing its job at a tactical level.
I suspect there'll be a few people listening to this now, Ralph, are just thinking, oh my gosh, taking a deep breath through their teeth at the idea of being appraised by their boss, effectively the chairman, on an annual basis. But you're making a really good point. And I'll honestly say I don't see it happening very often. Right now, I don't see it happening. Yeah, but it's a great idea.
And that's why they need to have the whip cracked over them to do this.
Right.
And one thing I would mention that isn't brought up more is chairmanship of the board, actual leadership of the board. Think
so what
about
makes a good one versus a not so good one? I was going to ask you that.
Yes, but think about the route. If you are a chief executive or a CFO of a major corporation, think of the career and education route you took to get there. You're very well trained. You have had a long apprenticeship. You worked your way up the ladder. Whatever else you might say, the person who is named to the role knows their business. They're proven, they know what they're doing. Now, how about if you're a leader of the board or chair of the board? Did you have any training in that? Did you have any education?
Yeah.
No. You probably are modeling yourself on whatever board chairs you have seen in your life. And it becomes a little like parenting. If you had a bad or abusive parent, you're more likely to be that kind of a parent. And if you had an inept, weak, or on the other hand, a bullying chair that your experience is, that's what you're going to model yourself on, because you've had no training on how to do this incredibly difficult job.
It's interesting because over in this part of the world, and I'm curious to know, are you seeing this too? There's a growth in the number of people, seasoned executives who are doing the Chartered Directors course. I think the IOD run it. I'm not quite sure. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing that in the US, Ralph?
We're not seeing it that much. We don't have any sort of certification trainings going on or programs. There is a very big industry among MBA programs, business schools, consultancy on board of director training. But even at the major things, and I don't want to cast aspersions on the IOD, but even their training tends to be at the very higher level of the issues of governance and dealing with the great matters of governance, and not things on like, how do I structure the committees to do a better job? How do I do a day-to-day nuts and bolts business of running a board? How do I manage workflow on the board of directors? How do I hack my way through all of this information? How do I train myself to walk into the board meeting and hit the bricks running? The tactical things that go into being a good director, even in good programs, is sort of dismissed. Well, that's the minutia. Let's get on to talking about the great issues of stakeholder versus shareholder issues. Well, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it links then to politics. Obviously, in bigger organizations will invest in team development and team nurturing, and even the leaders go through training in many cases to learn how to lead the team and get great collaboration and so on. But here we have a board which is a collection of pretty seasoned executives who've been brought in and effectively just put in a room, and then based on their skill set, the fingers crossed to ensure that they all get on together. But of course, human nature, dynamics will form, allegiances will form, cliques will form. What have you seen good versus bad in that regard around politics within the board?
It's a very difficult thing, as you mentioned, and it can depend on company structure a lot.
Mm,
Acquisitive M&A based companies may merge boards, and you will essentially have this team versus that team. They still identify with the company. Acquire a company, you're
right.
going to have a couple of directors on the boards who come with it here. Younger venture growth companies have this problem because as the company develops and goes through its funding rounds, investors are going to put members on the board. So you're going to have every round of venture investor pulling in their own direction, wanting to cash out this way, follow strategy that way. So you need good board leadership. But even if you don't have clicks on the boardroom, this gets back to the problem that leaders on the board of directors face. If you have a number of good, successful, independent directors, chief executives, retired chief executives, business leaders, get them together in a boardroom. What do you have on an ego basis here? You have a bunch of lead sled dogs all of a sudden having to sit around the table and work together as equals. Not
Mm,
easy. They're
yeah.
used to doing things. If you're the chair of that group, you have to try to get them to work together and play together. And it is not easy. And probably most of the talents and skills you learned in running a business, being a business leader, aren't going to apply in dealing with the boardroom. You're a
Right.
group of equals. Your formal powers as board chair are very limited. You don't give people in the company orders. You don't say, make it so. You have to use persuasion and
Mm,
emotional intelligence. So once you climb to the top of that ladder and you're chair of a board, so many of the lessons you learned in getting there are counterproductive. You have to
mm,
retrain yourself.
mm. And I guess sometimes too, board members have to, I mean, in order to do the right thing and be the custodian of doing the right thing for the great um, i- success of the company. I know back 20, 30 years ago, the whole focus was on uh, shareholders only. We're talking here about the Jack Welch days, where the only focus was shareholder value. Whereas now it has moved on to stakeholder value. Here I'm alluding to the importance of the organization's impact on people, profit, and the planet. Are you seeing enough movement in that direction and away from just shareholder value?
I'm not seeing a lot of it yet, but it is infiltrating at the roots level,
Right.
perhaps, of governance. Because again, you have these outsiders that are dealing with these new issues. How do we deal with the planet? How do we deal with our carbon footprint? How do
Hmm.
we deal with sustainability on a day to day basis at their companies? Once you gather them in the boardroom, they still have to look at the share price, they still have to look at the shareholders, but that's been going on in the back of their minds on their day jobs, and they are going to be bringing some of that consideration into the boardroom. And
Hmm.
it will affect what they look at here, the
Hmm.
reports that they're getting here. They're getting more information now on sustainability issues,
Yeah.
on investor relations issues at the
Okay.
boardroom level. So it's sort of a soaking at the roots issue on that and
Yeah,
changing
sure.
mindsets.
So I tell you, Ralph, we're going to stop for a moment and just take a break here. And when we come back, I'd like to get some more thoughts from you around the practical things around frequency of board meetings and size of boards and so on. Just back after this.
Okay.
Most businesses aren't failing because of bad ideas. They're stuck because great ideas aren't landing. The culture says one thing, the strategy says another, and the customer is caught in the middle. That's why I created the 7 Steps to Profit, a practical business framework to solve that. It's not another off the shelf solution, it's a proven transformation framework that joins the dots across culture, strategy, leadership, customer, and execution, with the tools and the structure to make it stick. Backed by 30 years of frontline experience and real research, this isn't just theory, it's traction. Our support is also enhanced by our own organization health assessment to give you clarity on what you need to work on. If you're ready for real alignment, measurable progress, and execution discipline, visit 7stepstoprofit.com. That's the number 7, and book your no strings discovery call. Welcome back to Boardroom Insights. I'm talking here to Ralph Ward, who's an expert on the makeup and the structure of what makes a great board. So we've covered a lot of ground here, Ralph, so far in terms of what makes a great board, non-exec directors, their role, the role of a board, the role of a chairman, how it differs across US where you're based and for many European organizations where, for example, the role of chairman and CEO is split. But just on a practical basis for a second, what's the ideal size of a board? Is it some way connected to the size of the company, Ralph?
Well, it is, and I think it'll continue that way. If you look at a large public company, FTSE 100, S&P 500 public corporation, you need a strong governance infrastructure at the committee level here. Audit, of course, but HR, governance, compensation, probably getting into things like risk, sustainability, finance. So if you want to staff a committee structure like that, you're going to need more members of the board. So everyone isn't simply on the same committees here. 10, 12 people at that level are probably wise and probably necessary. The smaller you get, the less necessary it becomes. But certainly you want to have some bleeding back and forth between committee membership here. I keep stressing committees, and I know I harp on that a bit, but as I said, that's where the action is happening in running a board of directors nowadays. People who do it essentially governance on a production line basis. You have the committees doing their components, and then those come together at final assembly for the full board of directors meeting.
So 10 to 12 on those larger ones, but when you go to a smaller company, and it kind of links to family companies, how does a family company or a scaling up company know that the time is now that we should bring in some expertise on the board?
Most often they don't, honestly, unless they get a reality check from the outside, from someone like you, the other experts who work with the companies rising on a day-to-day basis. One thing that I have noticed, and you probably noticed this too, especially over the last decade or two with the very fast growth, explosive tech companies, they have gotten themselves in trouble because you start out with the very essentials of sort of a bro club of investors and the founder as a board of directors, maybe a handful of people, the founder, top money guy, top operations guy as the board of directors. They hit the jackpot. They become a huge company. They go public. And the problem is their governance and board of directors is still stuck at the boys club level, and they get themselves in trouble. Think about Microsoft, Apple especially, but Elon Musk's company, all of them, or his companies, I should say, if you look back at them, all of them have had some near-death experiences with scandals, with problems. Apple certainly almost died a couple of times, and they had some scandals with Steve Jobs getting stock options here. That happens because you still have that boys club level of governance when the company has grown into a huge responsible public company. So yeah, you're going to have problems. You're going to have disasters. So I keep preaching again and again, start early at your young company stage, get one outsider at least on the board, someone who isn't representing the funders, who isn't representing the founders, who isn't one of the tech people or who you're depending on, someone who everyone can look up to from the outside to come in and be at times the grown-up in the room on the board as you start out. They don't own a piece of the action. They don't have any personal commitment, but they also have outside knowledge and savvy. Everyone will tend to listen to them a bit more. And that works with family companies too. Bring in an outsider early. It's standard advice with
Yeah.
family companies here. But again, it benefits them because in a way, a family company is like a family gathering or family meeting itself. If we have an outsider in the room at dinner, then we're going to act a little more professional. We're not going to
Mm,
argue and throw plates at each other and say, Mom always liked you better. And what about my side of the family? People tend to act a little more on their best behavior when you have an outsider in the
very good
room.
point.
And that
Mm,
happens in the boardroom at family
mm,
companies too. One, two is even better here
yeah.
because you realize you have to up your game.
Yeah.
You've
That'd be
seen
really
this
good.
with young companies where the agenda for the board meeting is something the founder scribbled on the back of an envelope on the way to the meeting or on the way to a conference call.
Yeah.
It forces you to, well, let's put together a formal agenda. Let's make proper minutes of our meetings here.
Mm,
Let's have everything organized well. Let's make sure that it's stacked well, that it's archived well here, because eventually someone is going to look at this. And if you're trying to go to a next funding round, if you're trying to come to some sort of an exit with the company, sell the company, what is going to bring a better price? If you have a really nice record of corporate records, everything in order, minutes, resolutions of the board, all the paperwork, or a pile of stuff scribbled on a paper and
mm,
printouts of somebody's text messages. Which one
yeah.
is going to install more confidence? Which one is going to bring a better price when you get to that point?
Yeah, no, it's great advice. Great, and certainly when looking for funding, whether it be banks or other routes for getting money, having that kind of external professional expertise, I think, also enhances their
Mm-hmm.
chances. It says the right thing to the funder that these guys are serious. Tell me, I want to round up and ask you, how do you see the future of the role of the board or role of non-exec directors in particular changing in the future?
I think they're going to be more active, hands-on, and advisory in what's going on by necessity. The idea of a board of directors sort of hanging back, being sort of the lifeboat of the enterprise. They're only used and only come into action when there's a disaster that strikes. That isn't tenable anymore.
Mm,
Problems are too fast moving. They're too common, and there are too many external impacts on a company nowadays. So you need people to be more hands-on and advisory, and that gets into the role of the chief executive. You have worked with chief executives who viewed a board meeting again like going to the dentist. Well, it's got
mm,
to be done. Get the material
mm,
together here. That's going out of fashion. CEOs are realizing I've got a brain trust here of
mm,
people who know what's happening on the outside, who have skills that we may not even be able to afford to pay for in a
mm,
consulting firm. And they're sitting around the table and getting a very modest fee from us. For God's
yeah,
sake, make
yeah,
use of that
yeah.
expertise. Tap into
And
that. So you're going to see more of that, more active board involvement in consulting.
and without getting into politics, Ralph, but the whole ESG agenda has been dialed back in the US with this current administration. Do you see it being dialed back up again in a few years' time?
I think it will because some of the measures involved here are ones that you can't get away from. What do we save by long term by being carbon neutral?
Mm,
How do we benefit by stronger diversity in the company and building up our internal talents here? Once you have those quantified and measured, then it starts becoming something you can't ignore at a boardroom and say, oh, well, that's just soft ESG stuff. These are
mm,
real numbers and they're
yeah,
going to add up. And we have to make the best use of them.
data-driven realities. Yeah, sure. Okay, so if there was one piece of advice you'd give to, on the one hand, a smaller company, scaling up family company who hasn't yet gone this route, or indeed to a non-exec director who has been invited to jump on a board, what is the one piece of advice you'd give to each of them?
Learn, More
Learn.
about the
Okay.
company, find out what you're getting into, find out who you're tapping into. We
Right.
talked a few minutes ago about if I'm tapped to serve on a board or asked, doing my own sleuthing and vetting on them. Companies on their part are doing that with potential directors now,
Yeah.
more and more. What ghosts do they have hidden away in the closet here? What is
Mm.
their background? Because things can pop up so suddenly, out
Mm.
of nowhere. You have the chief executive showing up on TV canoodling with his girlfriend when he's supposed
Oh
to be
dear.
married. Things,
Mm.
things like that. Someone puts a post on social media that someone grabs onto and stirs online outrage.
Mm.
That
Okay.
happens with staff. What happens when that person is also on your board of directors? You're going to
Right.
get attention for it now. So
So
you have to look at what
the
they have.
great advice for the individual who might be considering going on a board. And what about to the company who might be bringing people on board? What advice would you give to them?
The same level of backgrounding. Do some
Right.
sleuthing on them. It's amazing that people can get to a chief executive level, a major corporate position, and find out that way back when they lied about an academic credential or they misstated what their job level was sometime
Mm.
along the way. They may not have mentioned the fact that they had a legal issue back 10, 20 years ago that may have been all brushed over, but nowadays could pop up somehow in
Right.
qualifying them to serve here. You don't
And
know that. And companies tend to, when they look at someone's credentials, take them on face value at that
indeed.
level, because at that level, it's hidden away. You
Mm.
have seen this, chief executives who have gotten on the job of major companies, and somehow we uncovered, oh, they never got that degree that they claimed they did, or they
Mm.
only worked a few months at this or that company when they claimed they were at a major level on it, and no
Mm.
one bothered to
Mm.
check.
Yeah. Great
It's
advice.
hidden.
Great advice and great insights for anybody that just is curious about how boards are formed and how boards grow with non-exec directors, and great advice too for non-exec directors. Ralph, what's your own background? I mean, you're an expert here that is built up over time, but what did you do in your earlier career?
My earlier years, journalism, reporting, working on business media and public relations.
Okay.
35 years ago, I had worked in doing some editorial work on several publications, had an opportunity to take over the corporate board magazine. I said, well, I don't really know much about boards, but this looks interesting. And to come into that at the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s was sort of like landing in Paris in the 1920s when it came to art and literature. It was just at the moment when it was blossoming.
Yeah.
When I started on this at the beginning of the 90s, it was a very small circle of people who worked in corporate governance and consulted and thought about it. We all knew each other, and
Mm.
it has taken off into becoming a major industry. Uh, there's a huge amount of consulting advice, working with every measure of boards, public, private, family, dealing with technology issues on the board of directors, dealing with risk, legal, all sorts of things now here. A
Mm.
huge infrastructure, and I'm sort of like the lone pioneer who has everyone moving into the wilderness around me here. Maybe it's
Really?
time to move on and start a new career. But
Right,
it
right.
fascinated me, and the more I dug into it, the more I realized no one was doing what I was doing specifically.
Interesting. Good for
How do I
you.
run a board? How do I survive a board of directors? Someone
You're
needed
now
to
advising.
squeeze
I
it
mean,
together.
I know
No,
you're
go ahead.
now advising boards, aren't you? And also doing training. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, U.S. and overseas quite a bit, especially in the Middle East and
Yeah.
Africa, Asia.
Right. Good for you. And your books, I'm sure these can all be seen on your website. You tell me what the website is. How can,
In fact, in the new book, it's at hackingtheboardroom.com. Is a direct
okay.
link to it.
But so if people want to
Um,
contact you, that's how they get you.
yes, track me or at boardroominsider.com here. I'm always interested, and things are constantly popping up. As I said, I'm at an age when I'm looking at retiring, but
Oh,
As they
Oh,
said in the third
tough.
Godfather movie, they keep pulling me back in. So
Good for you.
I,
Well, it's a
and it's
compliment
fun.
to you. It's a compliment. Let's leave it there, Ralph. That's been fantastic. Great insights and great advice. And just for anybody curious about this world, you've given us a lot to think about. And thank you for that. So that's it.
Thank you, Alan, and I appreciate the work you do because it's
Thank you.
invaluable.
Thank you.
Boards need what you offer them to come in and give them the help that they need to be effective.
Super. Thank you. That's it from me until the next time. Boardroom Insights. Look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.